Hi there. This video is going to take you through some of the features we have introduced in OnApp 6.4. For those of you who are new to OnApp, OnApp is a complete cloud management platform for service providers. We include a full KVM virtualization stack, software-defined storage and networking, flexible metering and billing engine, fine control of user roles and permissions, and a huge template library and much more, all wrapped up in an intuitive white label self-service portal. OnApp can also manage VMware environments, integrating with VMware Cloud Director or directly with vCenter. Today, I'm going to focus on our vCenter integration, as this release brings some exciting new capabilities. OnApp turns your vCenter environments into a multi-tenant self-service cloud, so you can sell cloud services with your vCenter or improve the way you provision cloud resources to departments and users. If you would like to see a complete demonstration of OnApp for vCenter, then head over to our website where we have another detailed video that demonstrates all of the functionality OnApp brings to your vCenter. So before I show you around the interface, I just want to take you through some of the highlights in our 6.4 release. So we've introduced support for vSphere standard switches. In our previous releases, it was a requirement that you must be using vSphere distributed switches, which requires Enterprise Plus licensing in VMware. So us introducing this support gives a lot more flexibility depending on the licensing model you use with VMware. We've now introduced support for resource pools in vCenter. Previously with OnApp, when a customer deployed a virtual machine, it deployed to the default resource pool of a particular cluster. Now, in most cases, this is fine, and OnApp still has multi-tenancy built into its architecture, so customers can't see each other's virtual machines unless you decide to configure it that way. But the ability now to define a resource pool or create a resource pool for particular customers means that if you want to split your workloads up that way, then you can, and you can define specific resource pools for each of your customers. We've also made quite a major architectural change in the way we add vCenter resources to OnApp. Previously, we just added the whole vCenter resource, and you were unable to define which clusters you could consume for particular customers. You were unable to define different pricing for different clusters. So now, by adding this cluster as a compute resource, you choose exactly which clusters you want your customers to be able to deploy to. So you can exclude management clusters and things like that. And you're also able to now define different pricing based on different clusters. So for example, if you have a development cluster with lower spec hardware or a production cluster with higher spec hardware, you can now define different pricing for each of those resources. And another feature I'd like to go over briefly in this video as well is we've now introduced TOTP authentication with OnApp. So you're now able to allow your users to configure two-factor authentication with applications such as Google Authenticator or anything that supports TOTP. So I would like to take you through the interface now and show you some of these features. So I logged in to our environment as a full administrator. So I immediately can see a dashboard and everything that's going on within the cloud. But I just want to go to settings and show you what vCenter environments we've got configured here at the moment. So there is now an option here for vCenter servers, and you can add multiple vCenter servers to your environment. OnApp manages this from a single interface. So whether you're managing a single vCenter or multiple vCenters, maybe you've got a shared vCenter for some customers and other vCenters are private for particular customers. It's really easy to carve this up depending on your use case. So in this case, I've just got a single vCenter added, and I can take a look at the vCenter web interface here. But this is pretty basic. We've just got a dev cluster, which has got some lower spec hardware, and a production cluster here with some higher performance hardware here as well. So going back to our OnApp interface. Now, Once you've added in your vCenter environment, and it's really straightforward to do this, you just need the IP address or host name of the vSphere web client and some admin credentials. You're then able to add in which compute resources, which clusters you want to be able to consume within the OnApp platform. So if you want to keep your management cluster separate, you don't have to add that into the OnApp platform, and it's really easy to define what you want your customers to deploy their virtual machines to. So I've added a single cluster in so far. So I've added in our production one here, and I'm going to add in our dev one as well now. So I'll select vCenter and give it a name, dev cluster. Select the vCenter server that I've already added in, select the cluster, and select a compute zone I want to put this into. So compute zone is an OnApp term, but everything is organized into zones in OnApp, and this is how you would define which zones a particular customer can deploy to and how much you want to charge for those zones as well. So I've created one called dev standard performance, and I'm going to add the dev cluster into that. Click save. So now that's added in, I can start configuring this. So just to show you the benefit of now being able to add in individual clusters is when we define a customer's bucket, and this is the bucket is where you define what resources a customer can access, how much of those resources they can access, and what you want to charge for them as well. So let's just create a new one from scratch. Call them customer A. You can set some pricing at the bucket level as well if you wish, and OnApp also can manage Windows licensing. So I'll create the bucket, and now this is where you define what you want this customer to be able to consume. So I can now choose which of my vCenter clusters I want them to be able to deploy virtual machines to. So for the example, this cluster, I might just want them to deploy to our dev zone. I can define maximum limits, or I can leave it as unlimited. So I can say this customer can use up to 100 cores, 100 gigs of memory. I can set a few other items here as well if I want to. And if I want to set pricing, I can speed it up by selecting that duplicate to rate card. So every bucket is split between access control and rate card. So you can define what access you want the customer to have, and then define how much you're going to charge for it. In terms of data stores and networks, again, this is split up into zones. You can define how you want to split these up, but I'm going to choose which storage I want them to consume. And if you want to set an upper limit, you can. So I can say this customer can use 1 terabyte of storage from that particular data store. And then finally, I can define which network zones I want a customer to deploy to. So in this case, I'm just going to give this customer access to public network. So I'm going to give them a maximum of 10 IPs from that network. So OnApp also does complete IP management as well. So you define which IP subnets you want a particular customer to use. And when they deploy a virtual machine, it will pick the next available IP from there. So what I'm just trying to demonstrate here, though, is with this new cluster as a compute resource feature, you're able to define which clusters particular customers can deploy to. And the benefit of being able to define different clusters is you're also now able to define different pricing for each of those clusters. So in terms of pricing, you can set, for example, how much you want to charge per core per hour, how much you want to charge per gigabyte of memory per hour. It's really straightforward. And then as soon as the customer starts building resources there, they are charged accordingly for it. So as well as being able to define clusters as a compute resource in OnApp now, we've also added this ability to define or create resource pools. So OnApp will automatically import all the resource pools that already exist, and you're able to change the owner to a particular customer. So when they deploy a virtual machine, they're only able to deploy them to a particular resource pool. So I've created one here called customer RP, and we'll see this in our vCenter environment, customer RP. So whenever that customer deploys a virtual machine, it will always deploy to that resource pool. It's also possible from OnApp to create new resource pools and then assign them to particular customers once they've been created. So I just want to show you what this looks like from a customer's point of view. So I can log in as this user by clicking on their user account, logging in as that user, and then we see basically the customer's dashboard. This is what they see. So they can only see the virtual machines that they have built or have been imported and assigned to them. They now can see this resource pool option here. So they're unable to change the resource pool. They're unable to create additional resource pools unless you give them the permissions to do that. But they can see where their virtual servers are going to be deployed to, basically. So if I create a new virtual server, for example, I can select from a number of templates that exist in our vCenter environment. And as I go through, I can give it a label. I can set password if I want to. The pricing updates as I go through, depending on what I've defined in the customer's bucket. But what we've added is because we've defined this resource pool, the customer doesn't need to select it. It will automatically select the resource pool that they've got access to. But if you were to define more than one resource pool, they would have a choice here. And when that customer builds the virtual machine, it will always be deployed to that particular resource pool. So finally, I'd like to demonstrate the new TOTP authentication feature. So this is great for your customers to be able to secure their accounts into your platform. It's also, of course, great for your admin accounts to be able to secure those as well. So a customer can go to their user account, and under the user properties, they can enable TOTP authentication. And with a supported app, they can scan the QR code and then enter the code in here in the settings, press enable. So now if we log out of the platform and log back in, we'll see that that is now prompting for a authentication code. So vCenter user. And at this point, we're required to enter the code. And there we go, that lets us in. So this is a great for both your user accounts and your admin accounts as well. So this has been a very high level overview of the new features for vCenter, but if you'd like to see any of this in more depth, please get in touch and we can organise a personalised demo. Thanks for watching.